I'd actually like to hear your answer to that. Like, what government agencies do you think we could cut? And then maybe you could expand a little bit on BlackRock itself.
Yeah, I mean, we could cut all of them pretty much, and a lot of them we could cut entirely down to zero. And I don't pull punches because I think the Overton window has shifted so much. We have people apologizing for things that everybody knows is bad. Like the SEC, everybody knows AML KYC is bad. I was at a conference one time. It was one of these more statey type conferences, like a FinTech New York kind of thing. And I said we ought to get rid of AML KYC laws. And they looked at me like I was crazy, but nobody's really arguing that these things are good. Most of these agencies that we have, all these government bureaucracies, they're not really good. And we all kind of know that, but it's this big administrative state and system that keeps them propped up. So, I think it's good to, kind of mix things up a little bit, speak frankly. I mean, it sounds radical to a lot of people, but it sounded more radical 15 years ago. I was saying a lot of the same things about war and government expansion and these kind of things. It's a little more popular now. But yeah, I'd like to cut them all pretty much across the board. There's some you could do away with entirely. Department of Education, Department of Agriculture. The idea that we have this Department of Agriculture and it's a bunch of government people who know farming really well and they make farming work for America. It's just an absurd idea. I don't even know much about farming. It's not my field, but I can tell you right now, politicians in Washington, D.C. are not going to make our food better. And if you look at what's out there, food is a perfect example. We literally have obesity and death, actually, because the government is meddling in food. We have terribly unhealthy food because government has gotten involved. And they should be out of it entirely. Let the people make their own decisions about agriculture and education and just about everything else. I'd like to cut them other than where they're protecting people for protecting their life, liberty, and property. Those are the things that I like to have government for. But other than that, pretty much nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that is the sole purpose of government, really. Life, liberty, property. Anything beyond that is just interference, frankly.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're calling out AML KYC. That's sort of core to the administrative state of just tracking and tracing every financial transaction. Very panopticon dystopian-ish. And it's like, why do we have that? It's totally crazy.
Yeah. And that's a really new thing too. Early in my career, that wasn't the thing. I'm not that old, but there's people in their 20s now. They think it's like this all the time. Like this is how banking works or this is how finance works. They have to know your stuff. Well, they don't, they shouldn't. When I started my career, when I was in my early 20s, I was a financial advisor and stockbroker, right? Licensed broker, just like I am still to this day. And you could open an account. I could open an account over the phone with somebody. And all I needed was their name and address. I didn't even need their date of birth. I didn't need their social. I didn't need their ID. And they could say, I want to buy Microsoft stock. I'll pay you in a week. And they could pay me in a week. And when they first instituted ID, that was the first time it was done. The older brokers were like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you need your ID to buy stocks? It was as foreign to them as it would be saying you need an ID to buy a television now. Or, you probably do. Everybody wants an ID these days. And it's wrong. It's not their right. It's not the government's right. The government's supposed to serve us and protect us. It's not their right to be up in our business, looking into what we're doing. That's not a legitimate role of them. And it's a relatively new thing that they fooled people into thinking is some sort of thing that's needed to make the economy work, and it actually hurts the economy a ton. So we should just entirely scrap that. Let people do their own thing. And if people commit crimes, if they're doing human trafficking or something, then that's already a crime. The cops should chase that on its own, not using money laundering or chasing money as an excuse.
Yeah, it's a great point. And all of it's sort of doubly bad in a way, because not only do we have to use taxpayer money to pay for these administrative functions and functionaries, but they're also interfering with a free market process. So it's inhibiting wealth creation. It's inhibiting, the rising tide, so to speak. And it seems like, and I know you're a proponent of this as well, if we could just eliminate the monopoly on money, right, or let people choose whatever money they want, that would at least force these administrative functions to sort of prove their value, right? You couldn't just
Yes.
print money to keep growing these things that serve no one and hurt everyone.
Exactly. It's accountability. And you hit the nail on the head. These are the themes that I talk a lot about. The fiat money system, it's sort of triple evil. One, the first level of evil is that it hurts the economy. It hurts people's savings. It robs people of their money. It makes inflation and things like that. Second layer of evil is that it's it has all of this administrative nonsense that has no accountability, and that leads to sort of this third level, which I don't use the word evil lightly, but it is actually evil because it fuels stuff that we wouldn't pay for on our own. The things like you just alluded to, we wouldn't voluntarily be bombing Afghanistan for 20 years if everybody had to pay the bill for 20 years, if all through 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, you're like, oh man, here's my Afghanistan bill again, another 30 grand a year. And that's what it is. It's an enormous amount per household. You'd be getting your Afghanistan bill like, 30 grand, huh? Hasn't bin Laden been dead 7 years and he was in a different country? Is it really worth 30 grand now? And nobody would pay for it. Same if they were like, hey, I need another 70 grand to keep somebody in a cage over a plant. Be like, wait a minute, you still have people in jail. There's still people in jail in places where weed was legal. There's people that are in there and there's people with like serving 30-year sentences for trafficking. I mean, that ain't worth nobody's money. I don't care how bad you hate weed. I can't imagine anybody who wants to pay $1 million over the course of a prisoner's life to put them in a prison and keep them out of the system. So there's actual evils, with the prison systems and bombings, actual death. I don't use that word lightly, but fiat does lead to mass death, tens of thousands of lives. We can account to it in just the last couple of years in America. More than that if you count Iraq. Well over 100,000 people died.
Yeah, it's truly brutal when you start to look at it that way. I ran these numbers a long time ago, and I don't recall exactly what it was, but I think the war on terror was somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 trillion, maybe.
Yeah.
And this was only through perhaps 2020. So this is maybe like 19 years of the war on terror. And it just so happened we had also printed almost exactly $2.5 trillion in that same time period. So it's this obfuscation, right? We're blowing people up on the other side of the planet rather than sending a bill to each individual household where people would have the sticker shock of, what do you mean? It's 30, 50, 60, 70, $80,000 to fund this war. I'm not paying that.
Exactly.
Government can just print the money and then blame the price inflation on everyone else, right? Blame it on Putin, blame it on the greedy gas station owners, whatever it is. And that lack of, I guess, traceability and transparency just really works in favor of this, of the unaccountability of this institution.